The Galactic Empire stretched across countless star systems, its reach spanning light years in every direction. It was a monolith of power, with fleets that numbered in the thousands and technology so advanced it was thought to be unsurpassed by any other in the known universe. The Empire's might was not just in its numbers but in its unshakable belief in its own superiority. They had crushed countless worlds, subdued species deemed a threat, and incorporated the remnants into their vast machine. To them, the galaxy was a place to be controlled, and they saw themselves as its rightful rulers. Within the Empire, the idea of a challenge from a lesser species was laughable. Their commanders scoffed at the thought of any race attempting to defy them. They had grown complacent, their confidence bordering on arrogance, dismissing any potential threat that didn't come from within their own ranks. Among their military elite, it was almost a game, an amusement to see how quickly they could snuff out resistance, how effortlessly they could bend others to their will. The Empire's commanders routinely disregarded intelligence reports from their outer territories, assuming that any mention of trouble was just another minor nuisance to be handled with a flick of their mighty hand. It was in this atmosphere of overconfidence that the latest report came in. A small human fleet had been detected near the Empire's border, hovering close to a distant, unimportant sector. The intelligence was patchy, filled with details about the ship's primitive designs and the outdated, almost ancient signals they were broadcasting. The commanders laughed. Humanity, a species that was known only for its stubbornness and reckless bravery, was attempting to make a stand at the very edge of Empire space. The humans had been categorized as little more than a minor annoyance, an upstart species that had been contained and observed but never considered a genuine threat. The report was circulated among the Empire's upper echelons, met with amused chuckles and dismissive remarks. The images of the human fleet showed ships that looked like relics from a bygone era. Their designs were crude, their weapons systems clearly outdated. The Empire's analysts confidently declared that this was a desperate move by a species clinging to delusions of relevance. There was no indication that the humans had any real power, any capacity to challenge the might of the Empire. A decision was quickly made. They would send a small detachment, a token force, really, just enough to show these primitive creatures the folly of their defiance. The Empire's commanders viewed it as little more than a training exercise, a chance for their junior officers to gain experience in real combat without any real risk. They dispatched a fleet composed of a few destroyers and a cruiser, confident that this would be more than sufficient to deal with the situation. The order was given: engage, subdue, and return. The commanders did not even bother to inform the Emperor. This was a trivial matter, hardly worth mentioning in the grand scheme of galactic politics. The human fleet was a mere speck, an insignificant footnote in the annals of imperial conquest. As the imperial ships made their way toward the coordinates provided, the officers on board chatted casually, exchanging bets on how quickly the humans would surrender or flee. They were certain this would be a quick, easy victory, a reminder to the galaxy of the Empire's unassailable power. Yet, in their arrogance, they missed the small, subtle details that might have warned them of the true nature of what lay ahead. They dismissed the anomalies in the intelligence reports, the unusual signal patterns, and the discrepancies in the visual scans. They brushed aside any suggestion that this might be something more than a simple skirmish. Their overconfidence blinded them, and they sailed forward with all the swagger and certainty of a force that believed itself invincible. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The Imperial fleet cruised through the vast expanse of space, engines humming steadily as they approached the coordinates given by their intelligence reports. The commanders, relaxed in their chairs, watched the tactical displays with casual interest, expecting to find a ragtag group of human ships, an easy target to be dispatched without much effort. They began to monitor the human fleet from a safe distance, observing with a mix of amusement and disdain. The human vessels appeared to be relics, crude designs with mismatched parts, emitting signals that seemed almost ancient, relics of a forgotten time. The Imperial officers laughed at the spectacle. The human fleet looked as if it had been cobbled together from old scraps, nothing like the sleek, polished ships of the Empire. The signals they were broadcasting were archaic, using frequencies that hadn't been in use for centuries. It was almost comical to the Imperials, who saw this as a sign of desperation, a primitive attempt to bluff or bargain with a far superior force. They casually logged the data, not bothering to scrutinize it too closely, confident in their technological advantage. But as the Imperial fleet drew closer, their sensors began to pick up strange anomalies. The signals coming from the human ships seemed to shift unexpectedly, frequencies bouncing erratically in a way that didn't quite match the visuals they were seeing. Occasionally, the displays would flicker, showing brief, distorted images that made no sense. Some of the officers noticed unusual interference patterns, signal loops that should have been impossible given the supposed state of the human technology. The anomalies grew more frequent, but the commanders shrugged them off as glitches, blaming them on the outdated nature of the human fleet's equipment. They were too proud to consider that something more might be at play. The fleet moved into position, and the Empire's lead commander ordered a standard hail. They expected the humans to respond with either a plea for mercy or, at the very least, a surrender. They opened communications, broadcasting a message in the common galactic tongue, demanding that the human fleet stand down immediately and prepare for inspection. Silence followed, an almost unnatural quiet. Then, without warning, a response came through, but it was not what they expected. The human reply was garbled, coming in through a distorted channel, spoken in an old, forgotten language that none of the commanders could immediately place. The tones were harsh and broken, the meaning obscured by static and interference. The Empire's linguists struggled to decipher it, perplexed by the use of such an archaic tongue. Why were the humans responding this way? The message seemed deliberate, almost like a taunt, a puzzle meant to confuse and delay. The Imperials decided to take it as a sign of weakness. They assumed the humans were too poorly equipped even to establish a proper line of communication. Orders were given to advance. They would force the humans to communicate in a manner they could understand. The human fleet appeared to shift into a loose formation, but it looked sloppy, chaotic. The ships were spaced erratically, with no clear pattern or defensive structure. It was almost laughable, a clear indication to the Empire that these humans had no idea how to conduct a proper battle. The commanders felt their confidence rise. This would be over quickly. Yet, despite their bravado, there was a creeping unease that some could not entirely ignore. The anomalies continued, strange distortions in their readings, signals that seemed to overlap and contradict. The Empire's sensors flickered with information that didn't add up, but the commanders, blinded by their arrogance, brushed it all aside. They were still convinced of an easy victory, of a foe so beneath them that even the thought of a challenge was absurd. They moved forward, ready to crush this pathetic display of human resistance, unaware that they were stepping into a carefully laid trap. The stage was set, and the game was about to begin. The Empire's fleet, confident in its superiority, moved into position, weapons ready to fire. The humans had made no attempt to surrender, and now it was time to end this charade. But just as the Imperial ships began to charge their weapons, the human fleet suddenly shifted. In an instant, it splintered into hundreds of smaller vessels, each breaking away in different directions. What had appeared to be a disorganized group of old, mismatched ships now transformed into a chaotic swarm of targets, many of which were much smaller than initially detected. The Imperials were caught off guard, their targeting systems struggling to adapt to the rapid change. The swarm moved with bewildering speed, and it became clear that many of these new vessels were not traditional ships at all. Many were drones, decoys designed to mimic the larger ships. They darted in every direction, sending the Empire's targeting algorithms into overdrive. The Imperial systems, programmed to prioritize threats based on size and energy readings, began to malfunction, unable to lock onto any specific target. Some of the smaller vessels emitted signals identical to the larger human ships, while others transmitted nothing at all. The Imperial gunners hesitated, their targeting screens flashing with conflicting data. They had expected a single, disorganized fleet, not a complex web of drones and decoys. The situation grew worse. The humans unleashed a barrage of electronic warfare tactics. Invisible waves of interference began to scramble the Imperial communications, jamming their frequencies and feeding false data into their systems. Orders became distorted or lost entirely, replaced with ghost signals that had no source. The command ships tried to issue directives, but their words were twisted, coming through as incomprehensible gibberish. The Empire's carefully maintained order started to unravel, their ships firing at phantoms and empty space, wasting ammunition on targets that weren't there. Confusion spread rapidly through the ranks. Ships veered off course, some nearly colliding with each other as they tried to avoid what they thought were incoming threats. The more experienced commanders tried to re-establish control, but every attempt to regroup was met with new forms of electronic interference. Sensor displays flickered with static and false readings, ships appeared and disappeared from view, and the battlefield became a kaleidoscope of conflicting information. The humans had managed to turn the Empire's greatest strength, their reliance on technology, into a glaring weakness. Panic began to take root among the Imperial officers. They had been trained to fight a straightforward enemy, one that relied on brute force or simple tactics. But these humans were different. They fought with deception and cunning, turning the Empire's own systems against them. The commanders realized that their sensors had been compromised, that their enemies were feeding them false data to mislead and confuse. The realization struck like a blow. They were fighting blind, unable to trust their own eyes, and the enemy knew it. Desperation crept into their voices. Orders clashed as one commander demanded a full retreat while another insisted on pressing the attack. The fleet's communications became a chaotic tangle of overlapping commands, accusations, and pleas for clarity. Ships began to act on conflicting orders, some breaking formation, others charging ahead recklessly. The Empire's discipline, usually so precise and unwavering, started to crack under the strain. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its unpredictable maneuvers, weaving through the gaps in the Imperial lines. The smaller vessels darted in and out, drawing fire away from the larger ships that remained hidden in the confusion. Every attempt by the Empire to gain a clear picture of the battle was thwarted by another wave of jamming or a new decoy appearing on their screens. It was as if the battlefield itself was conspiring against them, shifting and changing faster than they could comprehend. The Empire had thought this would be a simple skirmish, but now they found themselves in the middle of a carefully orchestrated trap. Their advanced technology was useless against the sheer unpredictability of human tactics. The realization that they were facing a foe who had anticipated their every move began to set in. For the first time, the commanders felt a cold fear. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the prey in a game they did not know how to win. Amidst the chaos of the multiplying drones and decoys, the true human fleet finally revealed itself. Hidden behind the confusion they had so masterfully created, the real human ships emerged with a coordinated precision that caught the Imperial forces off guard. They moved like a well-rehearsed team, slipping through the gaps in the Empire's lines, targeting weak points with surgical accuracy. The humans struck where the Empire least expected, focusing their firepower on the command ships and the most critical vessels, the backbone of the Imperial fleet. The first volley of the human assault hit hard. Human ships darted in and out, using the disarray to their advantage, slipping past Imperial defenses with an agility that seemed almost impossible. The Empire's commanders scrambled to issue new orders, but their communications were still compromised. Human electronic warfare tactics continued to jam their signals, feeding them conflicting data and ghost commands. The Empire's attempts to regroup and form a counterattack were met with frustration. Ships tried to fall back into defensive positions, but their movements were hampered by the interference, their systems responding sluggishly or not at all. Weapons systems began to misfire. Cannons that should have unleashed a barrage of firepower fell silent or fired at empty space. Missiles veered off course, targeting decoys instead of real threats. The Empire's ships, usually precise and deadly, struggled to get a lock on any human vessel. Human ships seemed to appear out of nowhere, bypassing shields with tactics that defied the Empire's understanding of battle. The Empire had never faced an enemy that could fight like this, an enemy that turned chaos into a weapon. As the human fleet pushed forward, they began to pick apart the Imperial formation. They targeted the command ships first, understanding that cutting off the head would render the body useless. One by one, the key vessels of the Empire began to falter. The lead cruiser, a symbol of imperial power, took a direct hit to its engines, its shields already weakened by unknown methods. It shuddered, then exploded in a blinding flash, sending shockwaves through the fleet. A second ship, a battleship designed to anchor the Empire's defenses, was struck by a coordinated barrage, its shields collapsing under the assault. In moments, it was reduced to debris. The destruction of these key ships sent ripples of panic through the remaining Imperial forces. They were losing their ability to communicate, their ability to coordinate. Every attempt to retaliate was met with more disruption, more confusion. They tried to form a defensive perimeter, to regroup and mount a counteroffensive, but the humans pressed their advantage. They moved with a relentless determination, exploiting every opening, every mistake. The Empire's forces found themselves being pushed back, their formation breaking apart like a cracked shell. Realizing they were outmaneuvered, the Imperial commanders desperately ordered a retreat. But even this was met with difficulty. The human fleet continued its assault, targeting engines and propulsion systems, crippling the Empire's ability to escape. More ships were disabled, drifting aimlessly in space, their crews struggling to regain control. The remaining vessels tried to flee, but the humans harried them every step of the way, refusing to let them regroup or recover. The once proud Imperial fleet, thought invincible, was now in full retreat, disorganized and broken. They had underestimated the humans, dismissed them as primitive and weak. Now they saw the truth. These humans were not only skilled fighters but masters of deception and strategy. They had used their own arrogance against them, turning what was supposed to be a simple skirmish into a devastating loss. The human assault was relentless, and the Empire, for the first time in centuries, found itself in retreat, stunned by the realization that they had been outplayed by a force they had deemed inferior. The Imperial fleet, once a symbol of the Empire's unquestioned dominance, was now in disarray. Damaged ships limped away from the battlefield, smoke and debris trailing in their wake. The order to retreat had been given, but it was clear that not all would make it back. The realization that they had been thoroughly outmaneuvered by a force they had deemed inferior hung heavily over every officer and crew member. The airwaves were filled with terse, panicked voices, desperately trying to coordinate a withdrawal. What had begun as a show of force had ended in a humbling defeat. As the Imperial ships pulled back, the human fleet remained steady, holding their position without pressing the attack further. It was a calculated decision, one that demonstrated restraint and confidence. Then, across all channels, a single message was broadcast, clear and unwavering. "You underestimated us." The words hung in the air, a simple statement carrying the weight of the entire encounter. The Empire, which had always seen itself as the apex predator of the galaxy, had been caught off guard by a species they considered inconsequential. Back in the Empire's Central Command, the High Command convened in a state of disbelief. Reports of the battle flooded in, detailing every tactical maneuver, every unexpected development, every moment of confusion and panic. The analysts pored over the data, replaying the moments of the assault, trying to understand how their elite forces had been so thoroughly bested. There was no denying the reality. They had miscalculated, and it had cost them dearly. The humans, a species they had dismissed as primitive, had shown a mastery of unconventional warfare that defied their expectations. The High Command found itself in a heated debate. Some officers, humiliated by the loss, demanded immediate retaliation, a show of force to re-establish their dominance. Others, however, urged caution. They had seen the reports, the evidence that the humans had anticipated their every move, had lured them into a trap of their own making. They began to realize that this was not a fluke, not a lucky strike by a desperate enemy. This was a calculated, deliberate action by a species that understood strategy on a level they had not expected. Humans, they concluded, were far more dangerous than anyone had previously believed. As word of the battle spread through the galaxy, ripples of shock and curiosity began to surface among other species. The news traveled quickly, each retelling more dramatic than the last. The term, Death Welder, once used dismissively, began to take on a new meaning. It was no longer a term of derision but one of respect and fear. Species that had previously paid little attention to humanity began to reconsider their assessments. Some sought to learn more, sending out feelers and probes, while others chose to keep their distance, wary of provoking this unexpected force. The Empire's defeat was more than just a military loss, it was a blow to their reputation. For centuries, they had maintained control through fear and power, their fleets an unbreakable symbol of their supremacy. But now, for the first time, a lesser species had challenged them and won. The implications were vast. If humans could achieve this, who else might rise against the Empire? The very foundations of their authority were shaken, and the realization set in that they were dealing with a new kind of enemy, one whose greatest weapon was not sheer power, but unpredictability and cunning. In a quiet chamber, away from the chaos of the debriefing, one of the Imperial commanders sat in thought, replaying the events in his mind. He had seen many battles, faced countless foes, but never had he witnessed anything like this. The humans had used every tool at their disposal, had turned weakness into strength, had shown a creativity and boldness that left him unsettled. He knew now that they had underestimated humanity, and it was a mistake they could not afford to make again. The Empire, so certain of its place at the top of the galactic order, now faced a future filled with uncertainty. They had encountered a species that did not fit their mold, that did not play by their rules, and in that unpredictability lay the greatest threat of all.